We have a new journey to begin today. And it's called End, Last Things First. And what we're going to be doing is looking through what Christianity has generally identified as the four subjects involved with what we call eschatology. What is eschatology? It sounds like a fun word just to throw around, doesn't it? All right. That's the kind of technical, theological word we use to describe last day events, the things that happened in the end. Okay, so it's the four doctrines are death. It's going to be a cheerful series, as you can see. Death, judgment, hell, and heaven. So this is your August laid out before you. Death, judgment, hell, and heaven. You're like, oh, we just came from the Gospel of John, and now we're going to be talking about death. This is going to be cheerful. It's summer. Can't we wait until December when it feels like we're much closer to death? This is supposed to be a happy summer. We're supposed to be having fun and going on trips, and the parents are sitting there like it's only 2 weeks until school. I hear you. Well, here's the kind of focus. Here's the angle we're going to take when we talk about these four big, serious, heavy topics. The angle is, why do these things matter? Why discuss them? If you had to explain to somebody, man, you're meeting them in Walmart. I almost said Kmart, but I got to keep this real. Rest in peace, Kmart. Rest in peace. All right? If you're meeting somebody in Walmart and you're like, yeah, I'm Seventh-day Adventist, and oftentimes we're talking about stuff that happens at the end, and it's like, that doesn't seem relevant. I'm just trying to get through my day. I don't really have time as a Christian to be looking at this speculative stuff that's going to happen in the future. So our focus is to be able to help you answer that question about why these things matter, why it matters to talk about death or the final judgment or hell or heaven, and how we can do this in a way that you don't sound like a cuckoo bird. All right, that you're not climbing out on limbs without much support. All right, so that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to start with death, and I want to begin with a very, very carefully worded, very sympathetic phrase. You are all going to die. All right, little asterisk, footnote, unless Jesus comes first, okay? That's the footnote. But the main feature is we're all going to die. And I just wanted to start with that cheery note, and it's getting a little bit late, so let's just sing the final song and head home, all right? You got the gist of it now. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Why we're all going to die. Why is it important to say that? I want to read you a quote. There's a name and a half for Scrabble. All right. Jürgen Moltmann, I want to just read something that he said. To push away every thought of death and to live as if we had an infinite amount of time ahead of us makes us what? Superficial and indifferent. To live as if there was no death is to live in illusion. Why is he saying that? Moltmann is trying to identify and basically saying this is where we are as a society. We're in a society of eternal youth, where we do everything we can to kind of avoid this subject. In fact, somebody once said, because the infant mortality rate in the early 1800s was about 150 out of 1,000 babies never left where they were born, right? Today it's much less than that, but praise God for that. Somebody once noted that the roles of sex and death in Victorian society have reversed themselves in our society. In other words, death was everywhere. In the 1800s, it was everywhere. You saw it everywhere. People were dying everywhere, and yet you didn't talk about sex. And nowadays, we talk about sex a lot, and we don't talk about death very much. And this is his point, is that this is something we have to talk about. Yes, we are living longer. Yes, we are arguably healthier. We're healthier. We're healthier. We have unprecedented abilities to have fun and enjoy entertainment and kind of enjoy an extended adolescence. Says, but he's saying this is going to come with a cost, and the cost of not being able to talk about death in a serious way in our society means that we become superficial and indifferent. That's his thesis. Hang on to that. Because when we get to Ecclesiastes, we see two things affirmed here. There's two clauses in this verse. In Ecclesiastes 9:5, it says, the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. Now, as Adventists, okay, if you're an Adventist, whenever we talk about the issue of death, we're usually answering one very specific question. What happens when you die? Right? Usually that's the question we're answering. It's like, do I go to heaven or hell, or do I stay asleep? Okay, here's the short version in case somebody's still wrestling with that question. We can come talk to me personally, and we can go through the Bible verses, but let me just answer that question right now. You stay asleep until Jesus comes, till the second resurrection. Okay? That's what Adventists believe about that issue. But I think the topic, what the Bible says about death, is so much more than just that one question. It's not that that one question is not important. It's just that there's a lot more things to talk about than just that one question. So we're going to talk about those. So when Adventists come to Ecclesiastes 9:5, we ignore the first clause and we talk about the second clause. We talk about the fact that the dead know nothing, right? They just stay dead until Jesus comes. But there's two clauses. We got the second clause down. The first one is the living know that they will die. In other words, the living have an awareness of where these things are headed, where life is headed unless Jesus comes. And this is really important. They should not be in denial about the process of life, about where we all head. This is really, 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 really important. Okay? So we get this again, and we'll deal with this again next week in Hebrews 9:27, where it says people are appointed to die once and then face judgment. You think, well, thank you, author of Hebrews, for picking me up today, when you run across that in your devotion. But it's not about picking you up. It's about getting us to face reality. Because I believe that believers in Jesus should be people who face reality. Should not just pitter-patter around in our own little bubble, in our own la-la land, in the world we wish existed. You know, we got to deal with it. We should be the most realistic people on the face of the earth. Right? We're not deceiving ourselves and telling ourselves stories that we want to hear. We should be able to face the truth no matter where we find the truth. Now, Paul Wolpe here has this statement. He is not a Christian to my knowledge. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's not. Anyways, he was in a debate on the ethics of extending the human lifespan and life expectancy. And this is what he said. He says, life expectancy since the 1800s has doubled, almost exactly tracking the life expectancy increase has been a fetishization, I'm going to struggle over that word, of youth in the West. All right, do you understand what he's saying by that? He's saying basically, because our life expectancy has doubled really since 1900, since our life expectancy has doubled in the last 100 and change years, it has also corresponded to an increase in basically this kind of mania for this extended adolescence as adults. Okay, certainly we've gone from one extreme where 13-year-olds are working in factories. Okay, there's very little glory in childhood then, to perhaps another extreme where we enjoy being and remaining as young as humanly possible, and to the point where we don't even want to acknowledge death at all, to be able to look at it, to be able to talk about it, to deal with it. And so this is what he's getting at. As life becomes more comfortable, more certain, as we live longer, as death doesn't seem to be breathing down our necks anymore, we find ourselves less willing to accept and face the reality of death. And this has, in the words of Moltmann, allowed us to live in an illusion of youthfulness as a society. It has allowed us to become superficial. It's hard for us to face the big questions of life because life is a party. And stop bringing up things about the existence of God and moral truth and certainty because you're crashing our party. So, just to give you some example, when you look in the Old Testament in particular about the process, once you have a death, you have a period of mourning. And Joseph, for instance, mourned 7 days for his father when he died. If you this may be good instruction, I don't know. But if you were allowed to capture a woman in war and you said, well, I want to marry this woman now, you had to allow her to mourn for 30 days before you could marry her. Mourn for her parents, right? She left her parents. You think that's a really strange law. Well, let's get into it some other time. But the point is that 30 days was kind of, in the beginning, the maximum period of mourning. Now, The grief process was then, therefore, very important to them. It was a community affair. The whole village would come together and mourn with you. You were not left alone. So if you want to talk about the stages of grief, they were much better prepared back then to get through those stages of grief than we are today, right? Because you have support. The whole village comes together for you and mourns with you. And when I say mourning, it doesn't mean you're just crying nonstop for a month. It usually meant you wore special clothes. You wore mourning garments, or you ate certain food, and you didn't eat other kind of food, right? You didn't drink wine because that was considered like a celebratory thing. You didn't eat certain foods that were considered kind of too happy, right? And you ate, and this was a way of showing respect for the memory of the person who had passed, right? So it wasn't like you were just crying all the time. You wouldn't trim your beard, which today apparently half of our country is in mourning. Right? That's what you would do. And then when the period of mourning was over, you stopped. Right? There's no moping around for the next year. Like when the period of mourning was over, you stopped and you moved on. And this was the process to get people to be able to handle loss and to be able to push through loss in a healthy, vibrant way that we just don't have today. And I'm not saying we need to reinstitute 30 days of mourning, okay? But there's a ramifications to this, the fact that we don't do it anymore, and Moltmann will take us through this again. There we go. It says, people who shut themselves off from the mourning process, or who cut it short, will discover in themselves, and I want you guys to judge whether you think this is a fairly accurate description of the culture we live in, will discover in themselves insurmountable depression and increasing apathy. Listening to each other and talking to each other generates a dialogue in the face of death until the loss is accepted through the transformation of the what? Who? Of the mourner. Right? So it's like this is the goal of the mourning process. It's not just to cry for this person. It's the goal is the transformation of the one mourning. And he's saying if we don't go through this kind of process, if we can't talk about the reality of death in a serious and sober way in society, then it renders us a culture with insurmountable depression and increasing apathy. Is that a fair descriptor of the world we live in? Okay, fair enough. I'll just throw it up there again, right? The failure to face the reality of our mortality results in a depressed, apathetic, and juvenile culture. Right, this is the point they're trying to make. I think, wow, I'm feeling a little bit depressed. Hang with us. Hang with us. All right? And I might add that this is just my amateur observation, but I think part of maybe some evidence of the fact that we can't deal with this as a culture, we can't talk about this as a culture, is the fact that we don't talk about it, but we imagine it all the time. I mean, the rise of depictions of violence in cinema or in television or in music or perhaps even actual violence in society, like we can't talk about this at home. And yet the people who create visual media can't help but display it. And I think that part of the reason for that, this is my opinion, part of the reason for that is because it's kind of, we want to talk about it because we're scared. Because we're scared of death. And as a culture kind of leaves kind of the organized patterns of religion behind and the promise of an afterlife, it's even scarier now than it ever has been before. Like, what happens? And it's not, we know we're in denial, but we don't talk about it with anybody. And I think as Christians, we can have a therapeutic role in society, not just by walking up to somebody in Walmart and saying, hey, let's talk about death. I mean, unless you're near the food aisle, then it's appropriate, given the context. But, but to be able to help people with those conversations, to be able to help people walk through those conversations. It doesn't have to be at a funeral, but society as a whole, I think, is crying out for help. Because they're scared of what the future holds for them. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to face it, but they know it's coming. And I think we as Christians, given our view, I think we have something to say about this. All right? I think we have something to say about this. So, look, the reason why we have an advantage as Christians, the reason why we have something to say about this is because the followers of Jesus know how to face death. Because we understand that this world is not just a neutral place where things happen. We understand that we're in the middle of a spiritual war. Right? Like, nothing happens by accident. And we spend our whole lives under attack by the enemy. We spend our lives under attack by the devil. So we understand that there's that a lot of the things that happen to us, it's not just a coincidence. It's not just an accident. That we're involved in a battle. And so the world is for believers the valley of the shadow of death, right? And we live here every day. And Jesus said it fairly well when he was trying to cheer up his disciples. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. And I always love that verse, because it's like, if the world hates you, run to Jesus, and I'll hug you and I'll keep you safe. But it's like, well, if you find that the world's hating you and life is tough, just remember my life was hard first. It's like, get back on your horse. It's not a lot of touchy-feely sympathy there from Jesus. Right? Just remember, it hated me first. So we know as believers, this is what we expect from our life here. Not that it's always bad. Our life is great. But we expect opposition. We expect struggle. We expect as believers that there may come a time and place where we have to give our lives for Jesus. And if that's news to you as a believer, there you go. Right? We expect that may happen, where we have to give our lives to Jesus for his cause. So we conquer the fear of death as Christians by dying to self every day, by waking up in the morning and giving our lives over to God and saying, I don't know what this day holds, Lord, but I'm investing myself in it for you. I don't want what I want what you want for me. All right? So whatever this day holds, I wake up prepared. And if this is my last day on earth, well, then I'm giving it to you, Lord, and I'll see you soon in the resurrection. I mean, that's our attitude. And when you live that way, there's no reason to be scared of what's to come. There's no reason to be scared, because you're already ready. You've already made peace with your Maker. Every single morning you wake up, you've already purposed in your heart to live this day with purpose, and with focus, and with direction. And it's not just this aimless wandering. Like you have a goal in mind. And your finish line is not, gee, I hope I survive today. Your finish line is, I want to be faithful today. Because I know that this life is not the whole story. When we get to heaven, I think we're going to look back on our time here and be like, that wasn't even the introduction to the book. It feels like it's everything for us right now. But for a Christian, this is not everything. I mean, look at this hope that we have that Paul shares with us, right? Like, does this resurrection thing really happen? And Paul says, what you sow will not come to life unless it dies. So every time you plant a garden, you're practicing resurrection. Right? Every time you try to grow some flowers, and you practice this. Like, that seed has to go into the dirt for something to happen. I don't think the seed is like in your hand and then like falling down to the ground saying, oh, that's it. I'm done. I feel like if the seed was conscious, it's like, all right, get me into that soil, get me some sun, get me some water. I got some awesome things to do. Right? It's not a morbid thing for the seed. The seed is excited because the seed will never be anything amazing until it, quote unquote, dies in the soil. Does that make sense? And I think it's the same thing with us. Okay, it's not that we're eager for death. It's not that we look forward to it, but it's that we recognize we will never be fully who God envisions us to be unless we first pass through the grave. Footnote, unless he comes first, okay? Does that make sense? So that's why we're not afraid of death. We're not afraid of the grave. In fact, we look at it and we say, all right, that's the best Satan can do is kill me? Like, that's the best he can do? With countless people resurrected throughout the centuries, that's the best he can do to me? You know what I mean? And so it's like Satan's coming into your life. It's like, well, you know what? You better give up on Jesus or I'm going to do something to you. It's like, really? What can you do? You know what? The best you can do is kill Jesus? Hey, Satan, thank you so much for making him so much better in resurrection. And he'll do the same. That's the same result with you too. All right, you can only go so far with Jesus in this life until he comes and resurrects you. Then the potential is limitless. So yeah, that's the best you can do. Go for it. Go for it. I mean, look at Paul's exaltation, right? Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? I mean, he's taunting Satan, right? Is that the best you've got? Is that all you've got? Come on, bring it on. Is that all you've got? You've got nothing if that's what you've got. Like, he's taunting death. The thing that has paralyzed countless people, the things that have caused people to turn aside, to spend billions of dollars to avoid it. Here's Paul, 2,000 years ago, saying, that's the best you got? That's no big deal. We don't fear death because death has been rendered powerless through Jesus. Death is not the end of our story. It's the kind of doorway we go through to get to the real story beyond it. And I think part of the problem is when we live in a kind of a juvenile culture, it's there, the effort of not talking about death and looking to medicine and technology to preserve our life, right? Like to freeze our bodies until future science can reanimate us and cure whatever disease we may have. The reason why we do these things is it's a human way of achieving immortality without God. It is. And there's nothing wrong with prolonging life. Okay, live a full life and enjoy the benefits of modern medicine and all this sort of thing. But let's just be real about it. Okay? This is not your way of escaping death. This is not your way of cheating the system of life and death. Okay? Enjoy it, but be honest with yourself about where this thing is going. And this is important. There is immortality in this condition has never been a good thing. It takes 6 chapters in the Bible before God destroys the world because people who were living 900 years long trashed the thing. It's not about immortality right here on this side of death. It's about getting immortality on the other side of death when we can be remade again into the image of our God. That's where you want to live forever, not on this side. It's tiring down here, man. Can't imagine going 200 years this way. Goodness gracious. But our culture wants us to become Peter Pan, thinking that maybe if we never grow up, we never have to grow old. But it doesn't work that way. Growing up, as I was told as I told other people as a teenager, growing up is optional, growing old is mandatory. And there's only so much you can do in that direction, all right? But the motto of our culture right now is like in the words of Albert King when he said, oh, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. It doesn't work that way. Here's our hope, guys. Last text to crawl through. Revelation 1, 17 and 18. This is Jesus here. He placed his right hand on me and said, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, the one who lives. I was dead. You have a lot of people come up to you and tell you that? I was dead. But look, now I'm alive forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and I hold the keys to death. All right, as somebody who has lost his keys, I'm okay if Jesus finds them. I'm okay if Jesus has the keys to death. All right? Because what does that mean when Jesus has the keys? It means that he can unlock the grave whenever he sees fit. It means he is the master of life and of death, and that when he wants to let everybody out of the grave, Jesus can do that. It's no big deal. Right? So the grave is no longer under the power of Satan. Jesus stole Satan's keys. In fact, he's the rightful owner of them. Took them back. Took him back. Satan lost his ride. And now we don't have to worry. I love the image of this verse where Jesus put his hand on. I just imagine Jesus putting his arm around John on his shoulder and says, look, I was dead, but now I'm alive forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And not only that, not only am I better off, but I have the keys to the grave. And so you're better off too. You don't have to be afraid of death. And this is the point. You don't have to be afraid of death. Is it a serious thing? Yes, of course. It's something that we should prepare ourselves for. But you don't have to be afraid. And let me just let you in on a little secret here, friends. If you're not afraid of death, then what are you still afraid of? Because it occurs to me that if you're not afraid of death, then there is literally nothing in this world that you need to be afraid of. So this liberates us as followers of Jesus to live our lives without fear of any kind. Right? You don't have to be afraid anymore. And this is how we are to live our lives. So if we're going to live in a culture that's like, well, we don't want to talk about that, it seems impolite or indelicate to mention this in company, and we don't want to face it, let me tell you, we be like, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? My God has the keys to the grave, and I'm not worried. Let me tell you one story, and I'll sit down. This is a story, you may have heard this. It's about an old martyr. His guy's name was Polycarp, which, to translate for you all, means many fish. Polycarp was one of the last of the disciples, okay? He was, according to tradition, he was taught by the Apostle John. And now he was an old man. He got arrested by the Romans, who were in another wave of persecution of the Christians. And they brought him to the arena, right? And all the audience was there in the stands and ready to see him be executed. But of course, the governor comes in and says, will you deny Jesus? Deny that you follow Jesus, and, we'll let you go. Whatever. Just make that public pronouncement in front of all these people. And these were his words. These were Polycarp's words. He says, 86 years have I served him, and he has never done me wrong. How then can I now blaspheme my King and Savior? That is a man who did not fear death. It says, 86 years, my Savior has done me nothing wrong. How can I now blaspheme him? How can I now deny him? How can I walk away from him? Right? That is a man who has conquered death. And here are the Romans. It's almost comical in hindsight. Here are the Romans marching this guy out into the arena. It's like, man, we're going to kill you if you don't renounce Jesus. And Polycarp's like, what? Okay. Jesus hasn't done me any wrong. I'm not going to do him any wrong. And they're like, wait, no, you're supposed to be afraid, Polycarp. But I'm not afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. He was ready, because he had been dying to self. He had been waking up every morning and giving his life over to God. And there was nothing left to fear. Guys, I don't know. I mean, I know there's some people who follow Jesus for years, and yet they still haven't quite gotten over this fear. They haven't quite given it to Jesus. And I just want to encourage you guys, give that fear of death to Jesus, because once you do, a sweet, sweet calmness and peace will pervade your life, and you realize there's nothing left to be afraid of, and you can live with freedom, and you can be liberated to live with greater joy in your life. It's not about becoming morbid. Morbid people who are people who can't see past the grave. Us, we just keep our eyes up, and the grave is just a speed bump along the way. We know it's coming, fine. You know you got to slow down for it, fine. But we're looking past it. We're looking past it. Hebrews 12, it says, for the joy that was set before Jesus, he despised the shame of the cross. And it's like Jesus saw the cross, but he looked past the cross. He saw the pain and the punishment that he would have to go through. But beyond that, he saw smiling people, you and me, in heaven someday. And he says, what cross? Man, that's worth it. The devil just wants you to see the difficulty, just wants you to see the cross. Got to look past it. See the future that God has in store for you and say, that, death, that's nothing. Let's keep moving. Let me pray for you. Father above, as we go out today, we want to go out with joy. We want to go out with peace. Lord, it's not easy. It's never going to be easy to face our own mortality, but we know who has the keys, and we trust him. We trust you. So Lord, if there's someone in here wrestling with this, I pray that you would be there in his or her life and give them the victory over this fear and help them to discover the joy that we all share in Jesus today. We go out in your name and for your glory. Amen.